In this episode, we move into a topic that becomes more important every year because very few organizations operate entirely on their own anymore. Most businesses depend on outside companies and individuals for technology, hosting, consulting, payment processing, software support, logistics, customer communication, and many other services that affect security in direct ways. That means a security manager cannot think only about what happens inside the organization's own walls, systems, and teams. For someone studying Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, this subject matters because risk often travels through relationships, contracts, and shared processes just as easily as it travels through internal networks and applications. Managing and monitoring security compliance with external parties is really about making sure those outside relationships do not quietly weaken the organization's protections. It also means understanding that trust in a partner is not enough by itself. Good security management requires clarity, oversight, evidence, and follow-through so that external support does not become an external source of uncontrolled exposure. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An external party can be any outside individual or organization that provides a product, service, platform, connection, or operational capability to the business. That can include vendors, contractors, consultants, service providers, cloud platforms, outsourced support teams, legal partners, payroll processors, managed security firms, and even strategic partners who exchange sensitive information. Security compliance in this context means making sure those outside parties meet the security expectations, obligations, and controls that apply to the work they perform or the data they handle. Beginners sometimes assume compliance only means following laws and regulations, but here it also includes compliance with contracts, internal policy requirements, agreed security standards, and practical operating expectations. A provider may be legally compliant in a broad sense and still fail to meet the specific control expectations your organization needs. That is why security compliance with external parties is not just about checking whether a company says it takes security seriously. It is about determining whether its actual practices, commitments, and behaviors align with the level of protection your organization requires. One of the biggest reasons this topic matters is that organizations often outsource work, but they do not outsource accountability. A company may rely on another firm to host data, develop software, process transactions, or manage infrastructure, yet the business itself still faces the consequences if a security failure occurs. Customers usually do not care whether an incident came from a direct employee or a contracted provider. Regulators may still hold the organization responsible for inadequate oversight. Leadership still has to answer for disruption, data loss, legal exposure, financial damage, or reputational harm. That is why third-party risk is such a central idea in security management. The convenience, expertise, or scale offered by external parties can create real business value. But those same relationships can also create hidden dependencies and new attack paths. Managing compliance means recognizing that every important external relationship changes the organization's risk picture. Monitoring compliance means staying aware of whether the agreed protections are truly being maintained over time rather than merely assumed after the contract is signed. A common misconception among new learners is that if a vendor is well known, widely used, or highly professional, then security oversight can be relaxed. That is a dangerous assumption. Large and reputable providers can still experience breaches, weak control execution, poor communication, or gaps between what their marketing suggests and what their operational reality supports. Another misconception is that once an external party signs a contract, the compliance issue is basically solved. In reality, a contract is only the beginning of the relationship from a security perspective. It establishes expectations, but it does not guarantee day-to-day adherence. Security managers need to remember that trust and verification are not opposites. A healthy relationship with an external party can include cooperation, mutual respect, and open communication while still requiring evidence, review, and oversight. Managing compliance means understanding that external parties should be treated neither as automatic threats nor as automatic assurances. They are business relationships that must be governed with enough discipline to confirm that promised protections continue to exist in practice. Good management starts before the relationship is fully active, because early due diligence helps the organization understand whether an external party is capable of meeting security expectations in the first place. If a company waits until after the provider is selected and integrated into operations to ask serious security questions, it may discover weaknesses when change becomes expensive or disruptive. Early review allows the organization to ask about control maturity, data handling, incident processes, access management, resilience, subcontractor use, and overall security governance before dependence deepens. This is not about demanding perfection from every outside provider. It is about understanding the nature of the service, the sensitivity of the data, the potential business impact, and the provider's ability to operate at the needed level of protection. A small vendor handling low-risk work may not need the same depth of scrutiny as a provider managing critical systems or sensitive records. The deeper lesson is that security compliance with external parties should begin with informed selection, not with blind trust followed by disappointment. Contracts are one of the most visible tools for managing external party security compliance because they translate security expectations into formal obligations. A contract can define required controls, notification timelines, rights to review or assess, data protection duties, access limitations, logging expectations, reporting commitments, handling of subcontractors, and responsibilities at termination. It may also refer to service level agreement, SLA, commitments or confidentiality duties under a non-disclosure agreement, NDA. But the important point is that security expectations should be expressed clearly enough to support accountability later. Beginners sometimes think legal language alone solves the problem, yet vague contract wording often leads to confusion during the very moments when clarity matters most. If incident notification timing is unclear, if data handling expectations are broad and imprecise, or if audit rights are never meaningfully described, the organization may struggle to enforce its own expectations. Good contracts do not replace oversight, but they create a foundation that makes later monitoring, escalation, and corrective action much more realistic. Once the relationship begins, security requirements need to be integrated into real operational processes instead of sitting quietly inside procurement files. This is where many organizations weaken their own protection, because the selection and contracting phase may be thorough while the operational phase becomes casual. The external party may need defined access paths, approved contacts, onboarding steps, secure communication expectations, and clarity about which data can be handled and under what conditions. Internal teams also need to understand their own responsibilities for overseeing the relationship. A provider cannot comply with requirements that nobody inside the organization remembers to reinforce or review. This is why external party compliance is not only about what the provider does. It is also about how the organization manages the relationship. If internal ownership is vague, meeting schedules are irregular, escalation paths are unclear, and business teams assume the security team is handling everything alone, gaps can open quickly. Integration turns security expectations from static documents into part of the everyday mechanics of the relationship. Ongoing monitoring is what distinguishes real security management from a one-time due diligence exercise. Monitoring means collecting enough information over time to determine whether the external party continues to meet the agreed requirements and whether its security posture remains appropriate for the risk it introduces. That may include review of reports, control attestations, issue logs, incident notices, performance discussions, service changes, or other evidence depending on the nature of the relationship. The key idea for beginners is that monitoring should be purposeful rather than mechanical. The organization is not gathering information simply to create a file. It is trying to answer management questions such as whether control effectiveness appears stable, whether unresolved weaknesses are growing, whether the provider's environment has changed, and whether the risk to the business remains acceptable. Effective monitoring also looks for drift. A provider may begin the relationship in a strong position and then change tools, staffing, processes, ownership, or subcontractors in ways that gradually alter the risk without drawing immediate attention. Evidence matters because external party compliance should not rest only on verbal assurance. A provider may say that access is controlled, incidents are handled quickly, and sensitive data is protected appropriately, but security management requires some basis for believing those claims. The type of evidence needed depends on the risk and significance of the relationship. High-impact providers may require deeper review and more frequent validation than lower-risk vendors. Some evidence may be formal, while other evidence may come from review discussions, issue tracking, or observed performance over time. What matters most is that the organization can reasonably support its confidence in the provider's compliance posture. Beginners should avoid the idea that monitoring means demanding endless paperwork from every vendor. The purpose is not document collection for its own sake. The purpose is confidence grounded in something more substantial than hope. Evidence helps leadership understand whether an external relationship remains trustworthy and whether any emerging weakness requires action before a security failure turns into a business crisis. Issues, exceptions, and incidents involving external parties require especially careful handling because confusion tends to grow quickly when responsibilities cross organizational boundaries. If a provider experiences a security event, the organization needs to know who must be notified, how quickly information should be shared, what internal leaders must be involved, and how decisions about containment, customer communication, legal response, and business continuity will be made. The same is true for control exceptions and unresolved compliance gaps. If an outside party cannot meet a requirement exactly as written, the organization should not allow that difference to disappear into informal side conversations. It needs a clear process for review, risk understanding, approval where necessary, and follow-up. This is important because unmanaged exceptions often become the hidden path by which risk enters a relationship that otherwise looked well governed. Strong management of external party compliance includes knowing how to respond when things are not perfect, because security maturity is revealed not only by normal operation, but also by how well the relationship handles strain, failure, and uncertainty. Not all external parties deserve the same level of attention, and that is where risk-based thinking becomes essential. An office supply vendor should not normally receive the same depth of security oversight as a provider hosting critical applications or processing sensitive customer information. The level of monitoring should reflect what the external party can access, what business process it supports, what data it touches, how dependent the organization is on it, and what harm could result from failure or compromise. Beginners sometimes assume consistency means treating every vendor the same, but mature security management understands that consistency in principle often means applying the same risk-based logic rather than identical procedures. A simple relationship may need straightforward review and basic contractual expectations. A high-impact relationship may need more detailed oversight, stronger reporting, closer coordination, and more frequent reevaluation. This approach helps the organization use its time wisely while still focusing attention where business exposure is greatest. Without that prioritization, teams may overmanage low-risk relationships and undermanage the ones that truly matter. Internal governance is also critical because someone inside the organization must own the security dimension of each external relationship. If business units sign deals, technology teams integrate systems, procurement manages renewals, and security only appears occasionally, then compliance oversight can become fragmented. Strong governance makes clear who owns the vendor relationship, who reviews security conditions, who tracks issues, who approves exceptions, and who reports concerns upward when needed. It also helps ensure that external party compliance is visible to senior leadership when the relationship is important enough to affect organizational risk materially. Reporting matters here because leaders need to know where dependencies are growing, where recurring compliance weaknesses exist, and where external relationships may be exposing the organization to more risk than expected. For new learners, this is a reminder that third-party security is not a side topic handled in isolation. It sits at the intersection of procurement, legal, operations, technology, and risk management, which means governance has to connect those groups clearly enough that oversight does not fall into the cracks. Offboarding and relationship change deserve attention too. because security exposure does not end just because the business partnership changes direction. A provider that once had access to systems, information, credentials, or operational knowledge may still create risk if those connections are not closed properly. Ending a relationship should involve reviewing access removal, data return or destruction, service transition, ongoing confidentiality expectations, and any residual dependencies that remain after the formal engagement ends. The same careful thinking applies when a provider changes ownership, adds subcontractors, alters service models, or expands the scope of work. Those changes can affect compliance even if the original contract still exists. A common beginner mistake is to treat vendor security as a stable condition established at the start of the relationship. In reality, relationships evolve, and each meaningful change can introduce new assumptions that need review. Monitoring compliance, therefore, includes watching for change itself, because yesterday's acceptable arrangement may not remain acceptable when the service, provider, or business dependency has shifted. One of the deepest lessons in this topic is that managing and monitoring compliance with external parties is really about disciplined partnership. An organization gains value from outside expertise, scale, and specialization, but it must balance that value with oversight strong enough to preserve trust, protect operations, and support accountability. That balance requires more than a checklist. It requires clear expectations, strong internal ownership, risk-based attention, thoughtful communication, meaningful evidence, and the willingness to act when gaps appear. External party relationships become safer when security is treated as part of relationship management rather than as a last-minute approval gate or an annual paperwork ritual. For someone preparing for CISM, this is a valuable way to frame the issue. Security management does not stop at the enterprise boundary. It extends into the relationships the organization relies on, because those relationships can either strengthen resilience or quietly weaken it, depending on how seriously compliance is defined, monitored, and maintained over time. As we close, the main idea to carry forward is that external parties should never be treated as invisible extensions of the organization or as separate worlds beyond its concern. They are connected to business operations, connected to risk, and often connected to some of the most important services and information the organization depends on every day. Managing and monitoring security compliance with them means selecting carefully, defining expectations clearly, integrating those expectations into normal operations, watching for evidence over time, responding firmly to gaps, and adjusting oversight based on the true level of business impact. When that work is done well, external relationships can support growth, flexibility, and capability without quietly undermining the security program. When it is done poorly, an organization may discover too late that its biggest weakness was hiding inside one of its most trusted partnerships. That is why this topic matters so much in security management. It teaches that responsibility extends across boundaries, and that strong oversight is one of the ways trust becomes something earned and maintained rather than merely assumed.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.